Let's get some more analysis now from Vecchio, Republican strategist and attorney, and Dr. Wallace Ford, public administration professor at Medgar Evers College. We had you both on Friday night when we knew this was coming. So I wanted to get your reaction. Ken, you said on Friday night, support having the report released. I assume that's your same position now. Just let Congress have it.
It absolutely is my position. I do think that this has been such a harrowing experience, not only for the president and all the people that were involved in this investigation, but the entirety of the United States. I do think realistically, however, it's not going to come forward in its complete form because, as the Attorney General noted in his 3.5-page letter, there's actually laws that criminally prohibit his office from releasing some of the grand jury transcripts. Now, whether or not, if that can be gotten around, I think the Attorney General's office will want to release it too. Everybody wants transparency here.
Dr. Ford, do you think everybody wants transparency? Do you think Barr's going to try to release as much as possible?
Well, this is, of course, what we talked about on Friday, which is that there's some of the materials in the Mueller report would be very difficult to release because it is grand jury testimony, and understand that. I think, in terms of, you asked before, can the president put this behind him? Of course he won't. Should the Democrats put it behind them? I would hope they would, because I think, this is, you don't fight battles you can't win. Just to be clear, the president, and I saw with your tagline there, the president wasn't cleared. What they said was there's insufficient evidence to prove criminal conduct in this instance with respect to collusion. And of course, as we both know as lawyers, that the insufficient evidence doesn't mean there's no evidence. It means there's not enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And so the president gets a pass for that. And of course, with this question of obstruction of justice, I don't know what the question is. The president has been very clear. He said he fired Comey because he was getting involved in the Russia investigation and so on.
But there's an argument that he's allowed to do that.
But he even told the Russian ambassador that he fired Comey to get rid of that Russia thing, if you do recall.
I have to respond. I have to respond.
But there's nothing for you to respond to.
Hold on.
Those are the facts.
There's something very.
Those are the facts.
There's
Ken.
something clear for me to respond to.
Okay,
it goes like this.
Yeah.
There were two things that the special counsel responded to in his report. One was, did anybody involved in the Trump campaign conspire with the Russian government to influence the 2016 presidential election? He answered squarely no. The second was whether. Hold on a second.
But he didn't.
Hold on a second.
He didn't say squarely no.
The second was whether or not Donald Trump obstructed justice. He deferred to his boss, the Attorney General.
Sure.
The Attorney General fully exonerated him. He spoke.
But here's my question on that. That sets up the perfect question, because what Rosenstein and Barr did is they said because there wasn't sufficient evidence to accuse a crime of conspiracy of working with the Russians, therefore they could not bring an obstruction of justice criminal act against anybody. But here's my problem. If you go back to the last special counsel, and this is a guy by the name of Patrick Fitzgerald, who was investigating Vice President Dick Cheney and his former chief of staff, Scooter Libby. We've got a picture of them both. And they did not find in this particular investigation that anybody should be charged with leaking a CIA operative's identity. But Scooter Libby still got charged with obstruction of justice, perjury, lying under oath, and he was convicted on obstruction of justice. So this argument that you have to have an underlying crime is undercut by the last special counsel.
Ken, let me get a word in
edgewise.
edgewise.
Go, you've got a lot of him, but go ahead.
Okay, but all I want to say is this. My view is that on the obstruction of justice situation, ultimately the court of public opinion will rule with respect to that. I think there are other issues with respect to Donald Trump's behavior and conduct since he's been in office and before he's been in office that I think Democrats can focus on. But quite frankly, I think that this is a point, and we probably may be in agreement with respect to this, Ken, which is that I think it's time to move on from the issue from the Mueller report.
Would you acknowledge that you don't have to have an underlying crime in order to bring a charge of
Ask Martha Stewart. Ask Martha Stewart.
I will agree on your point that we should move on. I think that this is an incredibly interesting legal question. And the square answer to it is you actually, first of all, Barr in his report said that it is a legal issue, something that they were examining, and they did not make their decision based solely upon that principle. That said, you do not need to have an underlying offense in order to be guilty of obstruction of justice. If there's an investigation that's going on and you obstruct that investigation, you could be charged with obstruction of justice. But one really critical point, obstruction of justice is one of the most vague, ambiguous, and nebulous statutes. And it's the kind of statute that you use when you can't charge somebody with something.
And you have to prove intent. And
Right.
in order to prove intent, the normal prosecution procedures, you go to the person who's the target of the obstruction of justice investigation, in this case, President Trump, and you interview him. So was it a mistake? Because Mueller did not interview Trump about anything obstruction related. The questions that he submitted to Trump were all about actions that happened during the campaign, not any actions since Donald Trump took office.
You can prove intent by numerous evidentiary matters, and one of them is interviewing the person.
Right.
But people have a right to remain silent. So many times, prosecutors prove intent through all kinds of circumstantial evidence and other things like eyewitness testimony, video,
and whether somebody lies under oath during their deposition.
We're missing a point here.
What's really critical, though, at the end of the day, is that obstruction of justice is an incredibly difficult statute to prove, and oftentimes it's misused where you wrap facts around this ambiguous law and you say that constitutes obstruction of justice. Barr, Rosenstein, and several legal experts who have all the information said that he did not commit obstruction of justice. Everything I've seen as the author of the best-selling criminal law books in the country says he did not obstruct justice.
Well, here, just a slight point. He is the President of the United States, Donald Trump, of course, and so he's not going to be indicted while he's in office. He's not going to be brought to trial while he's in office, and impeachment, I think, is totally off the table at this point in any event. So we're really talking about something that's kind of moot. As I said before, the court of public opinion can look at all of his statements, look at all of his actions with respect to this entire Russia collusion matter and determine whether it constitutes obstruction of justice. But I think the Democrats are going to be best served by moving on from this issue because it's a battle they can't win.
But we have an opportunity to help people understand what obstruction justice is, which is why I think this is a worthy conversation.
And it's not that difficult. It's not the hardest thing to prove, by the way. I hate to disagree with you, Ken, but you know the point. Martha Stewart lied with respect to some issues involving insider trading. She didn't actually. She was never convicted with respect to insider trading. She did time in prison because she lied. It was very easy to prove that she lied.
But
with Donald Trump, it is beyond easy to prove that he lies because he lies all of the time.
That's not obstruction of justice. Lying is not obstruction of justice.
Lying with respect to an ongoing investigation certainly is.
Think about this. Yeah. Mueller, was no fan of Donald Trump's.
Well, I think it's vice versa, yeah.
Hold on. And Mueller himself couldn't decide whether or not he thought there was obstruction of justice. That, far enough, is reasonable doubt. Then on top of it, Barr and Rosenstein and several other legal scholars say no.
But the fact that he didn't close the door on obstruction of justice, can't we read into what Mueller was doing? And again, Mueller did not consult with Barr. He did not consult with Rosenstein. They didn't try to ask him what his intention was. Can't we read into this that Mueller felt like, okay, you know what? I can't make a call. The call that Congress makes is not going to be based purely on the law. They're going to take other things into consideration. What I want Congress to do is to figure out whether they think that the Trump actions involving obstruction of justice.
And I think that would be a real trap for Congress. There'd be a trap certainly for the Democrats in the House.
Was up to,
yeah,
right?
well, he punted. Yeah, he punted the ball, and I think the Democrats would be real wise just to call fair catch and just move on because they're not going to be able to win this. The president is not going to be indicted. High crimes and misdemeanors, again, it might get through the House. It's never going to get through the Senate.
Let me finally
so there's other things to talk about with Donald. Excuse me. It's more important to talk about what Donald Trump has done to this country and done to this planet.
We're going to do that starting tomorrow night. We'll get the last 20 seconds.
What we can read into is that Bob Mueller decided he couldn't figure out whether or not there's obstruction of justice. That in and of itself is huge reasonable doubt. The fact that Mueller and a whole team read his reports and said there is no obstruction of justice. They said there is no obstruction of justice.
Said there were difficult issues with evidence and with the law.
Yeah, again, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not a ridiculous question, but it's beyond a reasonable doubt. That's their judgment. There's nothing we can do about it sitting here today.
I can always do something about it by having Ken Vecchio and Dr. Wallace Ford. They're here to help me try to understand it. Thank you both so much. I appreciate it. Good to have you here.